we heard this morning, Paul writing to the Galatians, when the time was right, God sent his Son, born of a woman, so that we might receive adoption as children. This is the explosive truth that Paul, the former persecutor of Jesus' followers, had come to see through his conversion experience on the road to Damascus. The Creator of all had chosen to enter creation as a human being, born of a woman, which made God one of us. One wonders if God looked at the world today, if God would make that choice. It isn't that God hadn't been reaching out to humankind before that. In our first reading this morning, the prophet Isaiah calls God's people his beloved. And poetically, he likens them to a vineyard, which gets picked up again in the psalm we shared. A vineyard carefully cleared and planted by God in the hope of good fruit. But alas, says God, when God respected justice, he saw bloodshed, and expecting righteousness, heard a cry. This is not what God had in mind when creating human beings. There were consequences for the people of Israel in failing to keep their side of the covenant with God. And there were hints of that in the psalm. But as we know, that is not the end of the story. God sent his Son, born of a woman, and today we remember that woman. Our image of Mary has been shaped by centuries of iconography and piety. She's been characterized as the Holy Mother, the Madonna, the Queen of Heaven, and so many other names. And in fact, the National Geographic called her the most powerful woman in the world. This morning, as we're thinking about Jesus' mother Mary, we have heard the song attributed to her that we often call the Magnificat. Though it's featured in Evensong, it's often lost in the other stories of Advent and Christmas, so it's good to step aside and away from the regular lectionary and take a look at it in this season. The Gospels don't tell us a lot about Mary, who grew up in a small town in occupied territory, dominated by the Roman Empire, but Luke tells us of that visit of the angel Gabriel, who brought her for her alarming news. She was to bear a son, who she was to call Jesus. How, she asks, the power of the Most High will overshadow her. And furthermore, Mary is told that her elderly cousin Elizabeth had also conceived in her old age. Since to conceive before marriage could get her stoned, it's not surprising that Mary hurried off to the home of Elizabeth and her husband Zacharias, where Elizabeth, in Luke's telling of it, greeted her with, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. Look, when the voice of your greeting reached my ears, the baby, who would become John the Baptist, leapt in my womb. Blessed is she who has trusted that what God has told her will be fulfilled." Mary's song, which we just heard as the gospel follows. My soul magnifies the Lord, for the mighty one has done great things for me. This is the God who brings down powerful and lifts up the humble, who fills the hungry with good things and sends the rich away empty. This expresses God's bias for the poor even before Jesus was born. And as children and heirs of that Holy One, that too is our call and mandate. Now, it's easy to look around the world and see places where this isn't happening. It's easy to point fingers, and it's very easy these days to get discouraged. But think about Mary, a young woman asked to bear a child, which opened her to serious censure in her community, who nonetheless tells God, "May it be according to your will," and then sings, "My soul magnifies the Lord," and heaven prays. So how are we to respond? Today, this week, while I was flipping through an old notebook, I came upon this quote from a woman named Martha Postlethwaite. "Do not try to save the world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize and greet it." We don't know how the young Mary created a clearing in the forest of her life that made her open to God's call and promise. Mary's song reminds us, however, to create a clearing in the dense forest of our lives, to wait upon the call of the Holy One, and when it comes, however awesome it is, to recognize it and greet it as Mary did. Let it be according to your word. Mary's song also indicates that she was fully aware of the realities of human life and society. And later, Mary's action at the wedding of Cana, when she prompted her son to do something about the shortage of wine, demonstrates that she was not so heavenly minded as to be no earthly good. To be called by God implies that we are to take action that will bring the mighty down from their seats and lift up the humble and the downtrodden. That can be daunting for us as individuals, though Mother Teresa is quoted as saying, "We can do no great things, only small things, with great love." And this week, I heard David Suzuki remind us again that in the face of climate catastrophe, war, and global upheaval, we must come together. And so we do in communities of faith. Shortly after I was ordained some 30 years ago at a symposium, Lauren Mead, the author of The Once and Future Church, challenged us to understand that the age of Christendom, which had happened since the 4th century, is past, and that the primary task of the church today, as it was in the early church, is to be apostles. That is, to go out from our church buildings, to, quote, help people find God and be found by God, like Mary, and to build communities in which people are nurtured healed and fed, and God's word is studied and acted upon, that lifts up the humble, that fills the hungry with good things, that upholds justice and righteousness. That assumes that we pay attention to the needs of the community around us and the world, getting to know our neighbors, and find ways to bring the great love of God to their stories and their words. And so this morning, I invite us to think about how